Billionaire's daughter refused to sit next to black man. They laugh until he cancels the dollar. 850M deal. Terrence Adeyemi had flown in from Lagos 3 days early for the Whitmore wedding, not because he cared about the wedding itself, but because the timing worked perfectly with the final signing ceremony. For the largest acquisition of his career, an $850 million deal that would merge his logistics and infrastructure conglomerate, Adeyemi Global, with Whitmore Holdings' shipping division. The wedding was his goddaughter's, incidentally, the daughter of his oldest business partner, and the Whitmore family's estate happened to be hosting both events on the same sprawling weekend, the wedding on Saturday, the final contract signing on Sunday morning, in the same house. He was 44, built his fortune from a single freight brokerage in Lagos into a company that now moved cargo across 3 continents. And he had learned, over 2 decades of doing business with people who often assumed his success required an explanation, exactly how to keep his composure in rooms that weren't always built to welcome him. He'd learned it wasn't worth the energy to be offended by every small slight. He simply noted them, quietly, and let his decisions speak on his behalf later. He hadn't expected, walking onto the Whitmore estate's manicured lawn that Saturday afternoon in a well-cut blue suit, that the small slight waiting for him would be quite this loud, or quite this public. Priscilla Whitmore was 29, the only daughter of Bartholomew Whitmore, the aging patriarch, whose signature, come Sunday morning, would finalize the largest deal of his family's business history, and she had spent her entire adult life mistaking her father's wealth for her own accomplishment. She was seated at the reception's head table when Terrence approached, guided there by a wedding planner double-checking seat assignments, his placard reading, simply Mr. Adeyemi. "Oh," Priscilla said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, glancing up at Terrence with an expression that shifted, in real time, from polite confusion to something closer to distaste. "I don't think this seat's actually mine to give up. I was told I'd be seated with," she paused deliberately, letting the sentence hang. "Someone else? I believe the seating chart has me here," Terrence said evenly, gesturing to the placard. Bartholomew Whitmore, standing beside his wife with a champagne flute already half raised, let out a short, delighted laugh, the kind performed for an audience rather than genuinely felt. "Priscilla, darling, I'm sure it's just a mix-up," he said, though his tone carried no real urgency to correct anything. Priscilla didn't move. She raised one hand, gesturing dismissively over her shoulder, without fully turning to look at Terrence, the gold bracelet on her wrist catching the sunlight. "I'll just sit somewhere else." "It's fine." The way she said fine made clear it was, in fact, very much not fine, that the mere proximity was the offense, and everyone at the surrounding tables understood exactly what she meant, including her mother, who laughed along beside her father, as though the two of them were sharing a joke, rather than watching their daughter humiliate a guest in broad daylight. Terrence stood there for a moment, absorbing it not with shock, because this particular flavor of casual cruelty was nothing new to him, but with a quiet, deliberate calm that unsettled the people watching more than outrage would have. He said nothing. He simply turned, found another seat at a different table, and finished the reception with the kind of composed grace that made the incident, for everyone, except the Whitmores themselves, feel far more damning in its restraint than it would have felt if he'd raised his voice. What the Whitmore family didn't know, what almost no one at that reception knew, save for the small circle of executives who'd spent 18 months negotiating the merger, was that Terrence Adeyemi wasn't simply a guest with a coincidental business connection to the family patriarch. He was the sole and final signing authority on the $850 million deal scheduled to close the following morning, a deal that would have injected desperately needed capital into Whitmore Holdings' shipping division, which had been quietly bleeding money for 3 years under Bartholomew's increasingly hands-off leadership. Whitmore Holdings needed this merger considerably more than Adeyemi Global, did a fact Bartholomew had worked hard to obscure during negotiations, projecting an image of equal partnership that had never, in financial reality, been quite true. Terrence had structured the deal generously, in part out of respect for a decade's old relationship with Bartholomew's now retired father, the man who'd originally built Whitmore Holdings and who Terrence had genuinely admired. He'd been prepared to sign Sunday morning in good faith, closing a deal that would save hundreds of jobs across Whitmore's shipping division and secure his own company's expansion into North American ports. He left the reception that evening without confronting anyone, without making a scene, without giving the Whitmores the satisfaction of watching him react. He simply returned to his hotel suite, opened his laptop, and began drafting a different kind of document entirely. Bartholomew Whitmore arrived at the signing table Sunday morning at 10 a.m. sharp, lawyers flanking him, contracts printed and ready, entirely unaware that anything from the previous afternoon had registered as more than an awkward, forgettable moment. He greeted Terence warmly, performing the easy familiarity of a man who assumed the deal was already secured in every way that mattered. Terence didn't sit down. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to ask you something, Bartholomew. Yesterday, at the reception, your daughter refused to sit at a table with me. You and your wife laughed. I'd like to understand whether that was simply a bad moment, or whether it reflects something I should understand more clearly about how your family actually regards the people you do business with." The room went very still. Bartholomew's easy smile faltered, recalibrating in real time as he seemed to grasp for the first time the full weight of what had happened the previous day, and precisely whose hand it had happened in front of. Terence, that was Priscilla, can be thoughtless. She didn't mean anything by, she meant something very specific by it. Terence said, calm and level. So did you, when you laughed instead of correcting her. I've spent 20 years building relationships in rooms that didn't always expect someone like me to walk into them successfully. I don't need this deal. Bartholomew, your company needs it considerably more than mine does. And I suspect you've known that longer than you've let on in our negotiations. I'm not willing to merge my company's future with a family that treats people the way yours treated me yesterday, in front of 200 witnesses, laughing the entire time. He closed his laptop, the unsigned contract still sitting untouched on the table between them. The deal is off. The fallout moved faster and further than the Whitmores had prepared for. Word of the canceled merger spread through the shipping and logistics industry. Within days, not because Terence made any public statement, which he pointedly declined to do, but because Whitmore Holdings stock dropped sharply the moment the merger's cancellation reached their board, forcing an internal explanation that no amount of careful phrasing could fully obscure. Reporters covering the shipping sector began asking pointed questions about why Adhere Global had walked away from a deal that had, 18 months earlier, been announced with considerable fanfare on both sides. Bartholomew Whitmore, facing a furious board and a rapidly destabilizing shipping division, called Terence 4 times over the following 2 weeks. Terence didn't return the calls. What he did instead was meet, quietly, with 2 of Whitmore Holdings' senior shipping executives, men who'd spent years building the division's client relationships and had nothing to do with the reception's events, and offered them a different arrangement entirely, a direct acquisition of the shipping division alone, structured to preserve their jobs and their existing contracts, cutting Bartholomew and the Whitmore family's holding company out of the deal completely. The board, facing the alternative of watching the entire division collapse, approved it over Bartholomew's objections within a month. Priscilla Whitmore, for her part, discovered the true cost of that afternoon slowly, in pieces first through her father's mounting fury at a dinner table, where he finally, belatedly, explained exactly who she'd humiliated and exactly what it had cost the family, then through the quieter, more permanent realization that her social standing, built entirely on her father's now diminished business reputation, had never been as secure as she'd assumed. Friends who'd laughed along with her at the reception grew notably harder to reach in the months that followed. Once it became clear that being associated with the story carried its own social cost, she never publicly apologized. Terence never asked her to. He'd made his point in the only language he'd found the Whitmore family capable of hearing clearly, not through argument, but through the plain, undeniable arithmetic of consequence. Terence Iamme's acquisition of Whitmore Holdings' shipping division, completed without Bartholomew's name attached to it at all, became one of the more closely studied deals in the industry that year, not for its size, which was smaller than the original merger, but for the quiet, deliberate manner in which it had come together. Built on relationships with the people who'd actually done the work, rather than the family whose name had, for a generation, taken credit for it. He gave interviews about the deal exactly once, to a trade publication, and mentioned the canceled merger only briefly, in a single sentence that traveled further than anything else he said that year. I've learned that the true measure of a business partner isn't what they say across a negotiating table. It's how they treat you when they think the deal is already secured, and they believe there is nothing left for them to lose by showing you who they really are. He never elaborated further. He didn't need to. Everyone who'd been at that reception, watching a woman in red laugh with her parents, while a 200-guest garden party looked on, already understood exactly what he meant. The end.